Right, welcome everybody to this week's Mixing Monday. It is Monday the 24th of August, and today we're going to be discussing the subject of why people mix so loud. Is it a problem? Is it a cultural issue? Is it does it come down to different countries' legislations? Does it come down to personal preference? Does it come down to audience expectations? We're going to get into all of that. So, first of all, Stephen, can we just get a little bit of your background from a mixing point of view?
Sure. I won't be a great resource for this because for almost the last decade I've been on ears. So as far as volume there, but I mean, I started in clubs, so volume was a huge issue, and I think it definitely made the owners happier if you mixed quieter, and that also comes to the issue of the stage volume, depending how loud your mix is. But when you get into arena size or even outdoor venues, um, volume can kind of be at your discretion. So I mean, I guess my background with mixing, at least front of house, has been kind of really tight spaces where it's already loud without any PA. So you're kind of stuck as far as volume. And then from there, I don't know.
Cool. There's a few things that you mentioned there that while I was waiting for this Zoom session, I did a little Google search, something along the lines of average concert volume by genre. And I was expecting to find kind of a table of this is how loud rock concerts are, this is how loud classical concerts are, an average. But the first thing I came across was this website. If I share my screen, and maybe we can discuss what this guy has had to say. Which there's a few points that I actually either disagree with, or maybe I'm just misreading or misunderstanding. So this is a website, Medium Music. An article written by a guy called Jonah Woolley. Why are concerts so loud? Whether it's a basement show, a club, or the tour of a world-famous pop star, concerts have always found a way to turn the volume up to 11. This is an exploration of why. So Jonah goes on in it's not a long article, but we won't read through the full thing. We kind of pick some bits out of this. It's a well accepted fact that concerts are insanely loud. Everyone's experienced it before. Music screams through the venue, bringing your ears to the threshold of pain, even if you stand in the back. Now, for me, there's a difference between a concert being loud and being painful. I used to work with a flyman. I'm not sure if that's even the term in the States. Now, he was in his 50s. He had fairly bad hearing loss in one ear, but his other ear was perfectly fine. And he used to constantly sort of critique shows on whether they were good loud or bad loud. We've all kind of had that 2 to 3.5K sort of piercing. That feeling where there's two muscles in your ear, and I can only remember the name of one of them. It's your tensor tympani, and it's kind of a protective muscle that clamps down. And most people have, when they're listening to something loud, have had that sensation of like their ear kind of. I don't really want to keep doing that. But that kind of strange sensation inside your ear. And for me, that kind of comes with that anywhere from 2K to 3.5K. But I don't think that's necessarily down to. I think that's down to more of a mix issue or a system engineering issue whichever side of the court the ball lands on that one. But I don't think necessarily SPL alone is to blame for that. See, this says the ringing in your ears that persists days after the concert. Maybe. Whether a basement show, a club, or the tour of a world-famous pop star. So this is basically what you're saying at the top. According to Here, which I'm not sure who Here are. I'll click on that in a second. The average concert is between 110 dB and 120 dB. For a reference, Busy Street comes in at 80 dB. So this is again, this is written from either the point of view, like either the writer doesn't know, or they're assuming that their readers don't know. But this is just a straight SPL. This is just a dB number. There's no. Is it LEQ? Is it over 10 minutes? Is it over 15 minutes? Is it over 60 minutes? Is this an event average? There's no reference there, which kind of defeats the object. That's loud enough that you'll begin to suffer hearing damage after just 30 minutes of exposure. Well, yeah, I mean, if you've got a concert that's 110 or 120 dB from the moment that first track starts to the moment it ends, then you're probably going to come out of there with your ears ringing. But chances are, even if every single song was flat out, if it was EDM where you got very little variance throughout the tracks, chances are there's going to be some gaps between, and any break that you can get between these kind of levels is obviously going to change this figure. But why are concerts so loud, and why don't sound guys turn it down? There are a variety of reasons. First, a practical concern. Sound guys and showrunners want to make sure the artists are heard and have good energy, which can be hard in large venues. If the volume is too quiet, the performance could be awkward. Yeah, I mean, no one wants to go to see a concert in an arena and have it sound like the PA's turned off. There's a point here that I didn't quite understand. When artists are performing in stadiums, they want to make sure they aren't drowned out by their own reverb, and that requires turning the volume up quite loud. Now, for me, Stephen, does that make any sense to you? Because for me, I would kind of have to assume that if you turned the PA up, the reverb would follow.
I think that might have made sense in like the early 60s, but ever since we started using stage monitors, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Instruments can also cause high volume. Drums in particular are problematic, being 119 dB on average, the volume of a concert. And to be heard over the sound of the drums, the other performers need to turn up their volume as well. Now, are we talking now about stage volume? So we're not even in the realms of an audience member anymore. Are we talking about wedges on a stage trying to fight over the top of a drum kit? Because this is quite unclear. It's also jumped from artists performing in stadiums to then directly talking about stage volume, which, even anyone that hasn't worked in any larger venues, you can probably imagine that the bigger the venue is, the further from those instruments the audience is, so the less stage spill is an issue. You're hearing more PA than backline in a bigger venue. In a small club where you might be 20 feet from the drum kit, that's going to be more of an issue than if someone's on a 20 or 30 meter wide stage. Of course, there are times when none of these explanations are valid. When it comes to energy, it's possible to obtain good energy without turning the volume up too high. There are plenty of venues, like churches to clubs, that are able to have an energetic performance while only being at 80 to 90 dB, which is a lot more pleasant to listen to. This is a little bit strange for me. someone just outright claiming that it's possible to attain good energy without turning the volume up too high, without giving any kind of explanation how, not even hinting at any like explanation of how you would do that, and saying that it's possible to have an energetic performance while being at 80 to 90 dB, which is a lot more pleasant to listen to. This takes me to what I kind of mentioned right at the beginning, which was audience expectations. If someone goes to see Metallica or even something more pop, if someone goes to see Justin Bieber, can you imagine Justin Bieber at 80 dB? The crowd's going to be, the crowd's going to be 30 dB above that. So it's there's some issues I have with this. While stadiums can create reverb, a lot of artists don't perform in stadiums, especially with up and coming performers. They're playing in much smaller bars where reverb isn't a problem. Yeah, but smaller rooms have their own problems. Yeah. When it comes to drums, they're common cause for volume when they're being used. More and more, however, so at this point, this guy's talking about how the number one genre in the US is hip hop, and that electronic instruments don't cause. Well, according to this guy, I don't know the genre statistics of US music popularity, but what would you say was the number one?
Oh, I just think that's an interesting claim.
Yeah. And again, saying there are no loud instruments, that the artist needs to be heard over. So is genre at this point saying that there are no guitar amps or acoustic instruments that a PA needs to be able to bring the lead vocals over the top of to an audience member? Because as far as on stage, it's pretty safe to assume that everyone on stage is, more often than not these days, going to be on in-ears. It's, everyone's getting what mix they want on the stage, in theory. So I don't know. I'm not sure where he's going with this. Despite that, concerts are still loud. So is it possible that there's another reason that doesn't have to do with the practical side of things? For many artists, their performance isn't loud because of any specific reason. It's just because they want to be loud. Concerts before them were loud, so they figured theirs should be as well, right? Having high volumes can create intense experience for performers as well as the audience. There's just this power that comes with performing loud music. So, okay, defending loud music at this point. Artists have historically liked loud. Loudness war has been going on since the 1940s. While theoretically artists are making their music loud to gain more attention, studies have found no connection between loud volume and more sales. Many artists have continued to record and perform loud music simply because they like it. That's a difficult one as well, because if you're talking, certainly not as recent as the 1940s, but if you're talking more along the lines of the past 5 to 10 years, then comparing any increase in average loudness of an album versus its album sales is probably unfair anyway, because as far as I'm aware, album sales in general have, gone through the floor. Nobody buys albums anymore because everything is now available as singles. So people just pick the singles that they want and either buy them or stream them or, pirate them. Talking about Metallica's Death Magnetic, said the band wouldn't change it. And then he goes back from kind of saying that there's a power that comes with performing loud music to back to saying that this shouldn't be the case. The volume at concerts is excessively loud. While it might be nice for performers, it's making the concert experience worse for everybody else. Let me just see if I can find a date for this, because whoever this is, it's obviously at least post 2008, because referencing that there. last September. So this was a fairly recent article then, and this guy is saying that the artist wanting to be able to hear things louder is making the experience worse for everybody else. Now, I kind of wish that this guy had gone into a little bit more detail here, because he hasn't said whether he means specifically artists requesting or demanding that front of house levels are excessively loud, or whether they want loud on stage. In which case, this again goes back to whether or not people are on in-ears, how small or large a venue they're in, and therefore how much spill from the stage into the auditorium there may be from wedges or side fills. To be honest, if he's talking about stage volume, then saying it's causing hearing loss and ruining the music that's performing and forcing most people to wear earplugs, then if anyone's got wedges or side fills loud enough to cause hearing damage in the auditorium, then they should probably be getting their own hearing checked. And he says, concerts don't have to be this loud. There is a way to run them to make them enjoyable and energetic without having the volume so high. For the benefit of everybody, showrunners and soundmen should listen to reason and the loudness of their own concerts and turn the volume down. Again, saying, talking about how concerts don't have to be loud, that they can be ran at lower volumes and have people still enjoy them. But I'm not sure how much of a technical background this guy comes from, because not once has he mentioned anything kind of relating to the how of this situation. I'll stop sharing that there, and we'll come back to our regular view. Scott, hello.
Yeah, I'm back. So besides that article, what did I miss during my little bit during my ride? Because
not a lot. We kind of left starting the recording until it was about 20 past. So we started fairly late. So you haven't missed a great deal. We kind of just jumped into the conversation and then started on the article, which was something that at the start of looking at the article, I pointed out that what I'd done is I'd searched for average concert volume by genre, hoping to find a table of this is the average concert SPL for rock, for classical, for whatever. And the first thing I came across was that article, which just had a lot of points in it that either didn't make sense or I didn't agree with. Not that I was disagreeing necessarily with him not liking loud concerts, just that some of the arguments of the article seemed a little bit thin, or maybe badly worded.
Well, I think an interesting point to kind of jump off is the by genre thing, because at least anyone can jump in on this one, is the genre one, which was, I think you also mentioned, at least in my experience, EDM, techno, whatever you want to call that genre, I always found seemed to be the loudest, which you would think in theory, your typical, EDM techno is basically a DJ with turntable, whether it be CDJs, their laptop, whatever that. Beyond two speakers pointed at their head or in ears, whichever version they go, there's next to no volume on stage apart from the monitors. And you're like, so it seems like it's weird that would be the genre for the loudest. Like, I understand the culture and the behind it of like people wanting to feel like that's, out of all the music's probably the one you want to feel the most, because just the nature of how most of 90% of that music is very repetitive, but it's dance music. It's in the title, EDM, electronic dance music. But I just always think, why is this the loudest when your stage volume shouldn't, in theory, be as loud as take your typical, rock and roll band with double stacks and drums and all of this. And in fact, most of the, not all the time, but I found when I've either been, as I like to say, that traveling house guy, the loudest groups I've worked with have been electronic acts. Like the last electronic act I did, their house guy, their sound guy Like he just started at I put it like a decent level, and even then we had really nice Meyer subs. He insisted on bringing in his own subs this is not a knock at the company, but JBL subs from like 1992 that he was like being like, man, I got these for a great deal. And I'm just thinking, even then I knew, I'm like, this is just going to add so much latency issue, but I'm like, whatever, it's you guys. But that show was just so flipping loud. I was in the room next door and I was just like, okay, this is loud. And I can also tell stories, and I'm sure, where I was doing, long story short, I was doing a convention, and I just came in at one point during the rave, and I kind of took over the sound for like an hour or so. And one of the rental people came up to me like, man, you can make it so much louder. And like, I pulled up the fader, and then when he left the booth, I turned it back down to a reasonable like level. And I'm just thinking, no one came up when I was at my reasonable level. No one came, and I had it was a really like concert, like almost touring size system. I'm like, no one came up to me from the audience saying, hey man, can you make it louder? Like, no, everyone there was having a grand old time because the system had plenty of oomph. But I'm like, that guy's been up since 9 a.m. today, and he's probably fatigued. So I think that might also be an issue too, like in EDM festivals, especially. Like I'm sure, like take a show like, and there's my cat, one of them. Like for example, like Dead Mouse or Skrillex, or when it's just that one. Probably it's not as much of an issue because the sound person probably doesn't have as bad of fatigue as then, let's say, the house guy or gal who's been doing, Electric Daisy Chain for 3 days in a row, is probably their ears are fried. So, like, Stephen, I'm just curious on your experience on this. Like, do you find there's a difference in genre, or is it depending just whoever's at the board?
Yeah, I think there's a difference in genre, and I think also going along with like EDM, and then also going back to that article, I think that's one case that you can say the artists a lot of times will actually want it loud, when a lot of times they don't care. And I don't know where that started, but I think that has become the stigma of people just want really loud EDM. But yeah, and I feel like metal is generally louder. And it's funny you mentioned that the 9 a.m. fatigue thing. That has a lot to do with it too. If you have a really long festival that's been going all day long with the same engineer that's stuck out there, yeah, the fatigue I think will play a big role in that. And toward the end of the night, if he's mixing, and it's not the band's engineer, he probably will have it louder and just really not know it unless he's watching metering. But yeah, I do think that there is some difference in genre.
Yeah, I think there's some. Not even by genre in terms of I'm an EDM sound guy, therefore I want it loud. I think some genres kind of inherently, because of the dynamic range that's inherently part of a particular genre, where EDM is maybe 3 dB dynamic range throughout an entire track. Versus a rock or classical track, which has got far more variance. If you then park the peaks at a point where you're, just within the limiters of your PA, then the EDM is going to sound twice the volume, because the RMS of those tracks is just that much higher than the RMS of the rock or the classical, even though the limiters are maybe tickling just as much, just because the style of music is that there's far less difference between the peaks than the average. If it's EDM that's got all electronic with maybe some sampled actual instruments, even the sampled real life instruments have been processed to the point where the transients are not what they were originally, whereas the snare in a rock concert is going to be what it is, unless you're like heavily compressing it during that show. So this kind of goes to audience expectations. What does an audience go in to see a hip hop show or an EDM show or a rock show or a musical theatre or gospel? What exactly are they expecting when they go there? One thing that we didn't go on that article was there was one comment at the bottom where some woman had complained that she'd gone to see a Celine Dion show, which was far too loud. And I think, I still got that open. No, I've closed it. One response. Right, so if I... So there we are. Over on the right-hand side, I recently saw Celine Dion concert. I recorded the decibels to be about 107. I don't know what this woman was doing. She must have a dB meter app on her phone, maybe, or Apple Watch, maybe. I tried to plug my ears. It was really sad that such a good performance had to be ruined by the volume level. My ears are still ringing. I am very upset that our society allows this damaging tradition to continue. Why don't we cherish our ability to hear enough to protect from frivolous damage? I guess that will be my last concert. Now, I don't know.
Well, that brings up an interesting topic, Liam, is like, you would think this behavior would have stopped like in the 90s or early 2000s when just like it was understandable during like especially in the earlier days of PA systems where like you didn't have the technology that we have today. You didn't have, let's take just the 70s and the 80s with the exception of the early like Van Halen and stuff, but like you didn't have in-ears, you didn't have line arrays, so sometimes the only way to get sound was just to crush the audience. But nowadays, especially like let's say for argument's sake, line arrays really came into like wide use in the 2000s. It's like that should have been now enough time for like the new even both the new and the old generation to be accustomed to that power and throw without having to blow the roof off. And it's weird too that I've seen it in all ages, and I think it's also, to go back to the show I was being the house engineer for, that dude was probably in his 50s or early 60s, and someone I knew had said, yeah, I know that guy can't hear anything in the highs. And it's interesting, like I wish Lauren was able to come to the days, because it's like also like what frequencies as we start losing our hearing do we then accent that someone who has healthy hearing is then getting pummeled by? Because again,
this was one of the things actually when you came on and you asked what you'd missed. This was one of the things that we spoke about just before we got on to the article, was the fact that it's not necessarily an SPL level that you can just give as a number that is the show as a whole too loud, or is it just either a badly tuned PA or a mix issue? Is there an instrument that's not EQ'd properly? And it's maybe not that the whole show is too loud. It's just that there's 6 dB too much of 2K in an electric keyboard, or I don't know, whatever.
Right, and also could it be like sometimes if like let's say there's also where you are in the venue, like let's say you're being right in front of the stage where the front fills, and because typically even if you are someone who walks around during the show with your iPad or tablet of choice, you very rarely get to the front fills or where the front row hardcore fans are. So it's like, for all that could be blasting them in the face, while front of house is actually a very safe volume. So there's a lot of factors there.
Yeah,
and
I mean, even if you do go and check front fill volumes, unless you're unless you're at the kind of scale of performance where you've got barriers out in front of the stage, so that the audience can only get a certain distance within a certain distance of the front of the stage, then you can't really control how close to your front fill someone sticks their head. Right. This January when I was in France, we were in the zeniths in France saw 5 to 10,000 capacity, and there was no barrier system at the front of the stage. This was guys like up dancing to whatever their favourite Queen track was. By the third song, the front row was maybe 4 or 6 meters from the front of the stage. By the third song, that gap was full. And, you know, when you've got that gap full, there's inevitably going to be someone with a front fill here. So unless you set those front fills so that they're an acceptable volume for a person with the head here, which kind of makes them useless for everyone else, then, you know, there's not much you can do about that. Nobody's sticking the head inside the line array, but someone could stick the head in front of the front fill.
Yeah, which I think might be an interesting topic to also talk. Well, I want to talk later on about like what we can do, but it's like some other stories I kind of wanted to tell on this was, I'm not going to name the artist, but I'm going to name the event. So even it's the shirt I'm wearing. So briefly, every year there's a convention before COVID called Anime Boston. It's one of the largest anime conventions in the Northeast. And we will have these very, you know, well-known in the community acts, usually the artist who has done a song that was the opening for whatever anime that year was the big hit. And so they're usually Japanese artists. I think every year one year we had someone who wasn't Japanese, but that was alongside with other ones, but almost every year it's a Japanese act. And so they have various degrees, first of all, of understanding English, even though oftentimes they'll sing English lyrics. The understanding of the English language in Japan's a whole nother topic. But they apparently, one year, it was just ridiculously loud concert every single year. And to the point where I'd asked somebody in our department, I'm like, why is it loud every single time? This is insane. So you had a huge line array system, well-tuned by a company that knew what they were doing. And then the guest mixer comes in, and every year has blasted the audience to the whole time. Like one year, a really big act came through that was like really great act. I came in for like 5 minutes. I had to walk in the room wearing earplugs because outside, even like outside it was a 2-story conventions, like big main hall. I could hear outside the door. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna need earplugs, which is bad when you're outside the door and not even in the room. And I'm like, put them in, and even in there, I'm like, I'm wearing earplugs, and even with earplugs, this is like, I can't be here for much longer. And perfect example of just how loud and how little dynamics there were. One of the guitar players comes up for a solo. You can see he's soloing and doing all that. I can't hear the solo because all I hear from the speaker system is this. For an app, and I'm like, how the hell? And I looked down because I could see front of house. The board, every single channel was at 0. I mean at Unity. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, were they a mixer at Unity? But I'm thinking, even if they're doing that, nothing was below Unity. So I'm like, do they just like brick wall everything and just like not? So I was just like, how the hell can they stand this for that long? And I looked, and I asked to a point, I'm like, are we just getting the mixers that are mixing loud, or what's going on? They're like, oh no, in Japan it's cultural to be loud. And I was just like, okay, as someone who's never been to Japan and never been to a concert in Japan, I can't say whether that is or not. And I want to find out. Like one of these days, I plan on going to Japan for many reasons and going to concerts going, okay, was it just because also most of the acts we get are from a certain record company. So I'm like, maybe those people just happen to be the loud ones. And for all I know, every other club in Japan has very safe levels. But it's an interesting thing that was the first answer, was like, oh yeah, no, in Japan, it's typical to be loud at a concert. And I'm just like, okay. But I was just like, there's people literally, I remember, because one year as staff, our job, which on another, was to make sure people weren't taking videos of the act, which on a side note kind of annoyed me. I'm like, you do realize outside of this room, no one in America knows who the hell your artist is. So you're basically saying no to free advertising.
Yeah, not free publicity, please.
Yeah, basically. So it's like, what are you doing? But so we had to, and it was one of those things where I'm like, so I had to tell people you can take a picture, but you can't take video. But also we're seeing people plugging their ears. I tried to grab some extra like disposable earplugs. I'm like, here's something. But I would see people leaving an act performing great, but leaving, plugging their ears. And I'm just like, I want to like just go to the sound person and go, you are doing a horrible job where that you're getting people to do that. And it was so frustrating because I'm like, I was so low on the totem pole, there was nothing I could do. But it's just one of those things where it's, as I've learned since then, it's like, it doesn't matter where you are in the totem pole. If you're seeing something that's unsafe, you should report it. So
now, was this act kind of measured? Was there an SPL measure at this event? Because I'd be quite interested to know whether or not these people who were putting the fingers in their ear, and even your own reaction, whether that was down to a measurable SPL value, or whether or not it was just that pure lack of dynamic range. Had the whole thing having the appearance, for a better word, of volume, makes you instinctively assume that you need to stick your fingers in your ears.
Okay, so
it's kind of easy to trick your brain into thinking that there's a situation that might not actually be there. You know, I mean, that's the whole reason that a lot of things are over compressed on streaming sites, because you can, you know, the whole RMS versus peak volume. You know, I'd quite like to know what that was measuring at.
So I had on my phone, which was this phone. It's an Android. I forget, whatever. But I wasn't. During this, I was sitting in during sound check. I think sound check, I was at front of house and I was getting 110 dB.
Right.
At sound check, and I was just like, okay, that's a little nutty. And I remember, I think Michael told us that apparently the ones on your phones after a certain dB, they're inaccurate if they go over a certain amount. So I'm thinking,
yeah, because the input's going to clip on the phone.
But I'm thinking, I'm like, if I'm getting 110 at front of house, I don't want to even know what the front row and the other sections are getting. But
would you say that sound check was louder or quieter than the actual performance?
Quieter than the performance. The performance was even louder.
Because I mean, more often than not during a sound check, I'll kind of push things just to see what kind of headroom I've got.
Right,
which is for when there's a noisy audience there.
Right, but it was like, no, the show was even louder. It was like, it was loud at sound check, and then they made the show even louder because they were like, well, people who are in here should make it louder. So, and it wasn't just, headroom. In fact, the system, I hate to knock the company, it was a JBL line array, which I'm sure they make really good line arrays, but this particular model of line array would be more suited to the corporate. Like, to give a better example, like, there's also a masquerade and where it's a more variety show where they play music and like pre-recorded stuff and like winners of music video stuff, and it sounds fine on that system. So the system sounds good, but the minute the guest artist comes in and mixes on it, any dynamics goes away. It's that bad vibration, like the sound where I'm like, there's volume, and then you don't hear the fact that the speaker system isn't making a clean sound. Okay, and so that kind of just begs the question of like, if anyone's encountered of like, have you run into sound people who do that and like what their reasoning is for making it sound like that?
I mean, as venue tech for however many years it was I was there, 15 years. Yeah, I mean, I've come across any number of different types of mix engineers, and obviously it seems, certainly from my experience, that the kind of people that are happy to just run headfirst into a less than stellar system and, you know, no dynamic range and have the speakers distorting for 90 minutes and not working on the higher end of shows. we would get 2 or 3 kind of reasonable sized musical theatre shows, Joseph, Blood Brothers, some of the sort of, reasonable sized, not massive shows, but reasonable. And the guys mixing those were, you could hear that outside, but inside it sounded excellent. Now, that's system design. It's the mix engineer who I say mix engineer in musical theatre. It's more or less an operator. The ladies and gents mixing musical theatre more often than not the people that are responsible for anything other than pushing faders. They kind of know the cues, and they know the cues inside out, back to front. I absolutely could not do that job. I couldn't do line by line mixing. Not at all. I don't have the memory. I don't have the memory for that kind of thing.
What I do, just on a side note, I actually really enjoy doing theater. And I once saw, I'm sure maybe someone else has seen this, like where Adam Savage was like interviewing the dude who did Hamilton, and he says how he does it line by line. And I'm like, why would you do it that way? Like I do it, I can see why he does it, but how my method of doing it is I do it by scenes and acts. So I program a lot of scenes or automation or whatever the board I'm using calls it, because I'm like, again, I can't remember all that. But what I do, and I hate people who are like, oh, I memorized the script. I'm like, we're not actors. We don't need to memorize the script. So what I usually do is I fill my script full of notes saying, hit it here, mute here. And I'm sure for some other shows, you need to do it line by line. But I'm like, if you're on that level, I feel you should do that. But that was my little side tangent. But I often found theater doesn't have to, at least in my experience, at least in America, theater shows don't seem to be terribly loud. In fact, usually a lot of theater shows I've either done myself or I've been the local crew on, often will go out of their way to make sure the volume isn't blaring loud. Like they'll either use electronic drums, or if they need to use real drums, they will either put the drummer not even on, in the pit. They'll put the drummer like just in another room and run along.
In a booth. Yeah.
Or build a drum shield house or so. There's an active, and almost all the times when I've set up the band too, as part of the audio crew, they're on all in ears. So I think it's maybe because also that, at least in American theater, it's the tradition of the focus is on the performers and very rarely on the band.
Yeah. Again, that would come down to the sound designer, I guess. So it depends on which show you're working on and which sound designer designed the design for that particular show. Like the line by line mixing thing is standard in sort of professional musical theatre. If I'm doing something, if I'm doing, say for instance, pantomime, which is probably, lucky for you guys, something that you'll never have to do because in the UK. If I'm doing that for 5 weeks, I do it the exact way that you've just mentioned. I'm working on scenes, or like what makes sense to me as a scene, not necessarily a scene within a script, but I may be working from one character's entrance to another character's entrance, or from an exit to an exit, whatever kind of works logically to me. But for me, that's always because with a pantomime, I absolutely can't rely on the cast sticking to the lines or the timing. Whereas once you're at that professional level of musical theatre, people are like, it's like clockwork, and there's no fader up that doesn't need to be up. the less phases you have up, the less phase issues you're going to have. You're going to, not worry about feedback as much, and you're going to have a clearer show. But for some shows, it's absolutely not practical. So I just do what you do. But going back to pantomime, the last pantomime I worked on, I had my theatre manager sticking his head through the door pretty much every show for the first, I would say, 3 weeks, saying, I want it louder, I want it louder, I want it louder. And this was a point source PA, so I had to go into his office one day and just say, look, I can't make this any louder. You're standing, it was only a 650 seat venue, so probably 20 rows from front to back. I said, you're standing at the back, you're 20 rows deep. There's no way that if I get it to a volume that you're happy with stood at that back position, that someone in the front row isn't going to come and ask for their money back. We need to try and cover all our bases here, and that was quite a struggle explaining the technical limitations of getting a show to the volume that he was happy with in one position and not have it damaging at the front.
Well,
obviously,
Liam,
with line arrays, it's a different matter.
I think that also brings up an interesting point too, of like, we can also like one of the obvious ones about why some mixers are mixing too loud is the obvious one is, as we mentioned earlier, is hearing damage, could be cultural, but also management could have a say in it. Like, but it's an interest that's like now where you have to also get into like, not what I like to call non-politics political stuff, where you have to figure out the right way to explain to them, look, if I make it any louder, you're going to either, first of all, probably have hearing damage. And now, it's a weird thing, like what I mentioned this before, but I learned from my recent OSHA class is saying the phrase, would you like OSHA or would you like to get sued because someone got injured or died, whenever the management or whatever is resisting some kind of safety measure. And I think, unfortunately, I would prefer to just talk to the management or artist or whatever and just say, look, I just don't want this to be loud. And then you got to say the phrase, look, do you want OSHA or whatever governing body, or do you want a lawsuit?
This all seems really alien to me, because from what I can gather of the States, there's far less government involvement in maximum SPL levels.
Yeah, that is
than there are in the UK or Europe, especially Europe, and some, I don't know what you'd call them, pseudo-European countries like Switzerland.
Yeah, because I've heard stories of like, where someone from various sound mixers, where at European festivals, there's literally someone with an SPL meter telling you, while in America, like, I've never had any version of the SPL police come to me and say, Scott, you need to turn it down. In fact, it's always been the opposite, where management has asked me to turn it up. But then again, I also don't mix that loud. It's just my nature. But that's also been a lot of the things I found is all the concerts I've seen have all been in America. I've never seen a concert. Well, technically I saw one in France, but that was a classical one and doesn't really count in this discussion. But I think it's because of the lack of regulation in that one, which I think should happen. I've heard there's some cities have some kind of, like, there'll be noise ordinance in some places, right. But oftentimes those are more the annoying thing because it's not a dB limit. It's normally the rich folks up on the hill not wanting people to party past 10 p.m. Or it's like a ridiculous noise ordinance. You're like, why are we having a noise ordinance of 80 dB here? But sorry, I kind of got off on the topic. I think it's because I think it might be a cultural thing about the way just America is as a country.
Yeah. It seems what to me seems strange about it is it's that mix of no government intervention with SPL limits or little government intervention with SPL limits. And I might be completely wrong here, but as a nation, broader than just talking about hearing loss, but broadly speaking, America seems to be more litigious than Europe. There seems to be more people suing each other in the States than I ever hear about in the UK or Europe. So it seems to have kind of, in UK and Europe, kind of gone the route of, right, we're the government, we'll tell you what the limit is. And in the States, it's gone, we're going to stay out of it, we'll just let you sue each other.
Yeah.
Which is really, really odd to me.
And what's weird is the thing, I forget what, there's 2 volume levels, and Michael talked about it brilliantly. OSHA this is what causes you damage, and there's another one that is like, this is what you actually should follow. So OSHA is a federal organization, and the problem is about OSHA's regulations on hearing volumes. Almost all of those, the research is done for like someone working in a machine shop, or there's very little data on actual concerts. It mentions concerts, but like if you look at the diagram for OSHA, most of it is like, it goes like jet plane, construction, all this stuff, and like only 2 mentions of a concert. One's a rock concert, the other one's classical, but everything else is non-music mentioned, which is just, it's an interesting dichotomy of the 2 kind of way our countries go about things.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, unless someone wants to kind of talk about it more, I think we could go from that and just talk about prevention. I think might be a better way moving forward, is like how we kind of go about it. And I think Stephen, when Nathan interviewed you, you actually touched on how you did that when you were doing monitors for an act. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where you were I think you mentioned, I could be confusing you with someone else, and I apologize if I did, where like the bass player was on wedges or was on in-ears, but was still really loud, and he still wanted that low end, so you like added this plate or something that adds more of a low end thump.
That wasn't me, but I know what you're talking about. That's the butt kicker, and that they have that for drum thrones, but they also made like basically the same type of attachment on just an actual like wooden plate, so it kind of vibrates for them, so they feel that in their body, and the phase difference wouldn't be enough to actually do anything with the ears. So it seems like you have more low end there, which actually is something that I want to talk about real quick, because you can say loudness, and there's been a lot of people that say there's good loud and there's bad loud, and that goes into what everyone's been talking about with like too much 2K or whatever. But also the low end is a factor, especially like in theaters where you have bass traps. Because you can have audience members, and actually you can stand, under a balcony and just have the low end so terrible that it's unbearable, and then you walk out from the balcony and there's no low end. So I think, and I guess this ties into Scott, like talking about how to prevent it going forward. Some of that is system deployment, and actually whether you have a system engineer or you don't, just making sure that if you have any way to control the low frequency, or like a line array, we can obviously control beam steering, but some of that system deployment to help minimize the loudness. And then, I totally forgot about this, but we did a Comic-Con, or it wasn't actually Comic-Con, it was years ago, but there was a Japanese band, just like you mentioned. There was like, they played like video game music, and they were really, really loud. And I never thought about it as being a Japanese culture type thing, but that just brought back that memory. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's in the kind of, Scott talks about OSHA again, but it's one of the core things I learned on that class was, it's like, we should use like safety devices and all this, but it's like they hammered home, it's like you should design it first. The number one step, like for example, hard hat and gloves, while they are useful, they actually is like, first you should make the scenario where you don't need to have to use a helmet or gloves for things to be safe. Yes, use them, but it's kind of the same thing, like you just mentioned with the bass strap. It's like, if possible, try and design a system or change it around as much as you can, so that you're not doing a loud, what the hell is message? Sorry, spaced out on that, but it's like, yeah, it's just designing the system. And I'll just kind of go on some ways on, hey, look who's showing up. one of the ways, at least how I try and control it in my scenarios, is in my experiences and my level, I found that monitors, because I'm usually in much smaller venues like sub 500, where my monitor wedges, because I often don't have a lot of acts on in-ears. I love more in-ear acts, but that's another story. So what I usually do is, I learned this from a former engineer during a seminar, a former engineer for the Dropkick Murphys. When he came in, apparently Dropkick Murphys were like one of the loudest bands ever at the time. And what he did was kind of brought them back down. So, and he said one of the key things he did was, before he even brought them on in-ears, was he rearranged their monitor mix so it wasn't everything and the kitchen sink. Like, for example, he's like, the drummer needs the bass player, a little bit of himself, some keys, and maybe a bit of the guiding vocal. He doesn't need the weird like synth pad or all that. So first of all, that's how I do it, is like, I only give what the artist is asking for. I don't add all this extra noise to it. What I also do is I set my levels kind of lowish and have them like, not like, whisper library quiet, but I don't start with my monitor level fader at unity. So I'll try and build the mix like at maybe like, I don't know, -10, for example. And if they want it louder, I have plenty more headroom. So already their ears, so even if they need it louder, I haven't hit the ceiling yet, is how I kind of do it, is one of the many ways I accomplish that. And it's, again, back to the whole thing of, I only give them what they want. I don't try and give them everything, because I also feel, even take volume out of the scenario, that's kind of, in my experience, how to be a good monitor mixer, especially front of house. It's just like, what do they want in there? And trying to think of other things I do on that. Another one is, especially with guitar players, I will put it on a guitar stand. Guitar amp stand. That way the guitarist doesn't keep turning up their amp, because we've all probably had that version where it's just like, your ears aren't by your knees, they're at your head. But also in what I'll do during sound check, I'll do a similar thing I do with the monitors, where for my front of house mix, I'll have my fader at like either -10 or -5. So I get a volume I like there. So if during showtime I need a little bit more, I'm pushing it there, but I have a mix that still is not throwing anyone out. And also, I think this is me personally, in my upbringing, long story short, I have really good hearing, and the idea of super loud music just deteriorates to me after a while. So I always try and focus on that. And in the few times where I've done the long festival, I actually did a jazz festival where I encountered the fatigue issue, which looking back is always kind of funny, but to the point I was having such fatigue when I was mixing, I had to put earplugs in my ears. But I tried to monitor it till, like, I had it on my phone, and again, I know the phone's not the most accurate, but I still looked at it as, okay, what am I hitting? And and I always try and add, this was something I wanted to bring up during the EDM part, is while it only has a 3 dB range, I will force dynamics onto it. And what I mean by that is, like, during like the build up to the drop, I will bring the fader down 5, and then when the drop hits, boom, I'll bring it back up. So while it's not the best version, it still brings in some dynamics and a push and pull to how that kind of music goes along. So that's kind of it. I'm sure I'll think of other ways of how I do it. But the key bit is also, with any group that has a vocalist, I always try to make it where the vocalist, can I hear the vocalist? So that will force me oftentimes to push everything else down a little bit within reason. So I think that naturally kind of gives me an internal limit that I can't go over, because you make everything else louder, you then got to make the vocalist louder, and it's then this ongoing feedback loop. So like to hear other people's opinion. And also, hey Michael, thanks for joining.
Well, hello. Yeah, I'm on my kind of little tiny laptop. I wasn't sure if it was up.
Oh, we've lost audio.
Uh-oh.
Michael, you seem to have lost audio. You worked for a little bit.
How many audio people does it take to get audio working?
Yeah, on someone else's laptop.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So while Michael's figuring that out, Liam, well, how do you go about making it so it's not?
I don't know. Maybe I broke it.
Oh no, it's working again.
Okay, great. Cool. Yeah, sorry. So I missed whatever you just said.
We've said all the best bits now.
Yeah, I was just, again, my methods of how I kind of make it so it's not stupid loud volume, and what we were talking about earlier was just like loud concerts, how we've experienced, and like talking about like, well, what causes people to make it loud, and to make sure our definition of loud is not like, oh man, that's 100 dB, that's loud. Like, no, so loud that speakers are no longer producing clean sound. People are plugging their ears and leaving the room. And now we're kind of talking about just how we as sound engineers can make it, how we go about it, making it so, whether it be monitors or front of house, how we go about keeping the volume down and not making it stupid loud.
Yeah, I mean, so like the concept of loudness is it's a very slippery thing, right? Because you're talking about human perception. So, if I like Rage Against the Machine and my mother doesn't like Rage Against the Machine, and we're driving in the car and I turn on Rage Against the Machine, I might be like, yeah, this is a great level. And she's going to say, turn it down, it's way too loud. So a lot of things play into your subjective perception about whether or not it's loud.
Yeah, even if it's mixed well.
Exactly. I mean, like literally there's biological factors like how recently you got off a plane or how recently you've eaten. I mean, your blood sugar, the saline solution in your ears. I mean, there's all kinds of really interesting research about the things that play into our perception, the amount of distortion. Here's a great example, right? So take a two-way speaker and turn it up until it's just shy of uncomfortable, but it's not uncomfortable, and then unplug the woofer. So now you just have the tweeter. All of a sudden, that's perceived as way too loud, and you want to turn it down and leave the room. So, there's really two answers to with the loudness thing. There's a subjective thing, which I can't tell you what you think is too loud. We all have our own idea of that, right? Just like if it's a good mix or a bad mix. But the only objective sense here is it safe, right? And that is pretty clear cut. We in 2020, we have a really good idea of what's unsafe in terms of SPL. And the word volume is a word that I try to avoid in these conversations because it has like no technical definition. So, there's loudness and then there's SPL, right? So I think the whole thing sort of is a double-edged, it's like the Two-Face from Batman, right? Like you have stuff that perceptually sounds really, really comfortable, but could be objectively dangerous. And you have stuff that sounds awful and sounds too loud to us, but is not dangerous. And that's the real sticking point, I think, is that none of us, we can't rely on our sense of like, does this feel uncomfortable to me? That is not a good determination for whether or not it's safe. And that is effectively why there's so much stress put into like objective ways of determining this, like having a meter, right? That's the whole reason we do that. The SPL meter is not there to tell us whether or not it's loud. We know whether it's loud. We have our own perception of that. That's not at all why we get into metering. But I think something that you said in your email, I think was really that I was thinking about since you said it, which is why do people mix so loud? Why are shows so loud, right? And we've all been asked why don't they give out earplugs at concerts? Which seems like a good question until you realize the better question is why is the concert so loud that people want earplugs, right? And I think it used to be that, back when you're doing just huge ground stack PAs, it had to be loud in the front just so you could get to the back. But nowadays, our systems are up in the air and they're flown, and we have amazing technologies and zoned PAs and line arrays, and we have really, really good stuff that I've talked about with you in the past about, okay, well, we now have the ability to make every seat get the same show, right? Those tools exist. So now why is it so loud that people are complaining and asking for their money back? I think one big factor, okay, so psychologically, we can't ignore the fact that loudness lights up stuff in our brains, right? Like, I mean, the space becomes tactile. You know what I mean? That's a really that there's data on this, that it really does fire off something in your brain that doesn't fire off when you're 20 dB quieter. So people like loud is something that we can't ignore. But also, I think a lot of people that have been doing this job for a long time probably have some hearing loss.
Yeah.
We've all heard that mix that just was like an ice pick in the forehead at 4K, and that's probably because the person who's mixing it probably has some hearing loss at 4K. So I mean, raise your hand if you've gotten your hearing tested every year, right?
So I need to get mine done. I should. I really should.
It's free. Like Hearing USA, Hearing Health USA, like a bunch of the national chains will give you a free audiogram. They look at you a little funny when you ask them for a copy of it on the way out, because most people don't want that. But I have a file of them. I have my hearing every year, because that's your best defense. So I mean, be aware of like what your hearing health is, and you know. Also, by the way, a baseline's really great. If you're in a car accident the next day and the airbag goes off, airbag inside a small vehicle, 165 dB SPL peak or more, can rupture your eardrum, right? So if you then, you know, legally you can't go, well, you crashed into me and it ruined my hearing, you have no baseline, so your case, you can't prove that, right? But if you have a healthy audiogram from a week ago, like a baseline is really important. So that's the other thing. I think people like loud, and I think that a lot of people who do our job have hearing loss. I think those are, and also I think there's sort of a cultural thing. It may not be a popular statement, but I'm prepared to make it that's become the expectation. People sort of expect. Why do people go to concerts with earplugs in their pocket? Because they expect that it's going to be loud. And in my experience, they're pleasantly surprised when it's not loud.
Yeah, and Michael, a little earlier, I was telling the story of a convention where I subbed in for about an hour on a mix, and I turned it down a little bit more because I hadn't been mixing all day. I was doing something else. No one came up to complain to me. The audience was having a grand old time. Everyone was jumping, dancing. The guy from the AV company came to me and told me to make it louder, and I knew he'd been up since 9 a.m. So I'm like, and this was like not like 11 at night. So I was like, he had either fatigue or hearing damage or whatever. But it's what you also say interesting about the cultural thing too is we were also mentioning, I mentioned some stories from bands from Japan that had come over to play some conventions here where they were all really loud. So I think it's also a cultural thing too. But another interesting thing about on the mixing side is, you know, to be a lawyer, you have to pass your boards. To be an accountant, you have to have, I think it's your CPA or whatever it is. That's a regulated industry. Someone can walk down the street and say, I'm a sound engineer, and they are. So while that has some good things because it allows so many different ways, it also means some people don't actually know what they're doing with the sound system. And I don't mean like, oh, they don't know how to mix. It's like they don't know, or like a doctor knows how a bone works or how the heart pumps blood, but I don't. And it's the same thing with sound. It's like, just because you know how to, you know, make a great sounding mix doesn't mean you know how sound works and what it can do.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think part of that is that our field is young. I mean, how long has doctor been a job, right?
Longer than our jobs.
Yeah, like, but for like, you know, centuries. We pretty much started 1964, 1965, Beatles and Shea Stadium. So bye, Steven. It's good to see you, man. So yeah, our career is really it's in its infancy in a lot of ways, and it really hasn't been. I mean, go back and look at some photos from the first Woodstock. That's just brute force, man. Like the state that our technology is in and has come into in the last decade or so is so in terms of being able to control this stuff, we're first generation still, right?
Yeah. And I just realized, like, yeah, it's a field that's, like, for argument's sake, only about 60 years old. So, like, it's a similar.
But for most of that, it's got to be super loud in front so we can get to the back. That was just the physical reality. So the amount of time that we've been able to say, okay, I'm going to design a system that is exactly 6 dB louder down here by the barricade than it is at mix position and make that work. Maybe 10 years, right? Really in the mainstream. So this is a relatively new thing. So I think part of that needs to propagate, but it's also important. I mean, you're right. There is no real barrier to entry other than you can mix, right? Or you're in the right place at the right time, because some people that do this job for a living can't really mix very well. So I think we have started seeing a lot of certifications pop up. Like, I mean, even something like Dante, where it's their own thing and you don't need it, but like our industry has come to view that as this person cares enough about getting this right that they took time to watch the videos, and stuff like SynodCon that's really highly respected. And so nothing's required yet, but if you show up with 10 certifications, you're going to be more impressive than the person who shows up with no certification. And it just says, hey, I take this seriously. So, and of course there's a VIXA and there's CTSD and there are those things that I think are going to become more commonplace. And I would love to see something along the lines of, hey, I have been exposed to some basic information about how human hearing works, and I understand how it can be damaged, and I understand how to make. I mean, I teach a whole class right now. The whole class is how to make your mix sound loud without having high SPL, right?
That is something that fascinates me. I love that idea. It's like,
take the class, man.
Well, I'll message you later on LinkedIn about because it's like, that's one thing I hate, that I always name drop him, but he's a great example. Pooch talks about how
my class,
that idea he mentions of like
Yakabuski. I mean, so the whole thing is like when you have a speed limit, right? We talk about SPL PowerPoint stuff, and then we have a roundtable discussion with those guys about what are some things you do to make your mix sound loud and sound impactful without killing people. Where I'd like us to get to as a field is, even if you don't have an SPL speed limit for the day, we're still metering it and we're still keeping track on that stuff because it makes us better and because it allows to have this good experience at a safe level. And I think we're past the point where you can't really argue with a straight face anymore that it's okay to go out and just destroy people's hearing. Like our sense of professional responsibility has evolved beyond that. So I think the next step is let's talk about how to do that. But I also think our hand's going to be forced in a way. Like I think the Apple Watch, like I said last time I was here, in a big way, we are no longer the gatekeepers of is this too loud information, because now you've got 25,000 people in an arena, probably a third of them have an Apple Watch on, and it's going, hey, this is dangerous, you should leave, right? So our hand's being forced, and I think that's probably a good thing. But also, things are bubbling under the surface with the World Health Organization and different bodies in our field and in general that are looking at these issues. And do we need to have national rules? That USA is Wild West. Go to Europe, they have tons and tons of legislations about how loud your show can be. And I mean, it's very heavily legislated. But I think it's coming in the US, and I think it's something that a mature industry. I mean, look, those pictures of the people that are in New York in 1910 building the skyscrapers, and they're sitting out on the edge of the beam with their lunchbox having their sandwiches. Right? Like that. Why does that seem so crazy to us? Because we're like, OSHA, like you're not tied in anything. Like the field wasn't mature enough yet where those things were in place. So I think part of audio becoming a mature field is that we do it safely.
Why do you think that UK and Europe have got a very different model to legislating SPL limits when compared to the US? Why does the government in the US not already have like such strict rules as Europe?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's something that I know a little bit about. I would love to learn more about it. I've talked to some people in Europe that deal with that stuff. Part of it is I think part of it is that states' rights issue versus the federal government issue. I think that's a major thing, right? But I also think we have workplace regulations. Those don't cover audience members, right? So if you work in a venue, you are protected by OSHA's noise exposure limits. Now, those don't protect your hearing. That's another topic. But I think another factor is there was, I think in 1971, it was the Noise Abatement Act, and it was put under the EPA. It was largely focused on interstate commerce, so highway noise, construction site noise, those types of trains, right? That's law still on the books, but it got defunded. So there's no one enforcing it. There's no one out there keeping tabs on it. And if you look at the jurisdictions, state, federal, county, that do have things on the books, a lot of the text is borrowed from or based on that now defunct 1971 Act that we don't have enforced in the U.S. It's interesting because it's sort of not affected. Like, so the two reasons you're going to pass this law, noise, the two reasons you're going to put an SPL limit on the books. One is protect people at the show, so exposure, in which case you're generally looking at A-weighted over a period of time, or exposure directly. Or you're talking about people that aren't at the show, so noise pollution, nuisance noise, bothering the neighbors. That stuff tends to be C-weighted because it's the base that we need to have in that measurement, because that's what's going to irritate the people.
Yeah.
And it's taken at the property line. Those are the two functional ways to put that, to have that law achieve a goal, right? The weird thing about it is the stuff that's held over from the 1971 Act is A-weighted generally at the property line. So it's not really serving either purpose. It's how loud you can be at the property line does nothing to protect people that are in the building. And taking an A-weighted reading at the property line or outside the venue has nothing to do with the frequencies that are actually going to cause a noise complaint. I mean, you have a lot of situations where there was just one on, I think it was Bixby, it was a church, and they were on the news because they were getting complaints from the neighbors and the city kept finding them and stuff. But it's like, I looked up their law, I went through their state code and I looked it up, and it's A-weighted at the property line. So my guess is they were probably totally compliant with that, but they were still bothering the neighbors. So you get into a situation where the law is now just a source of irritation because it is not doing the thing it was created to do. And that's not helping anybody, right? So that AES report that came out that Adam Hill was the chair of, it's a great report. I got to help a little bit with that report, which is really, really cool. I'm very grateful for that opportunity, but it's a great source of guidance on this stuff and why the laws are the way they are and sort of how to do it right. And I think I just want to close by saying that I think it's important that people realize this is not something like to be scared of or to rail against. Like, we're not coming to stop your fun. It's the three-pronged, there are three goals. People at the show are safe. People outside the show aren't being bothered by the show. And the people at the show have a great time. We want to have the experience. That's the reason we want to go to shows. No one's saying turn it down so low that no one can have fun anymore. It's very important that when we do these things, we have to do it with as little of an impact as possible on the enjoyment factor of the audience. That's why we have the show in the first place, right? So I just think that's important to remember when we talk about this stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I know that's just a whole bunch of very interesting things too about like just the law aspect too in America too, is like why that hasn't caught up. And because, like, for example, now this is where I'm going to mention my ignorance, but from what little I know, in Europe is like, because there's what I like to call the volume police at festivals there's at least some laws and regulations that you understand, or like an organization you can call saying, okay, at, insert festival, what's your limit? And they'll tell you, okay, it's this weighted. So you can at least figure out, but like in America, like you just said, it's the Wild West, like, yeah, it means this, but like, is it A-weighted? Is it C-weighted? Where are you taking the measurement? Because like that convention I mentioned where I was on the board for an hour or so, I then was earlier out there or later of a concert I knew that was stupid loud. I went outside and the loudest thing was the traffic right by the road. So it doesn't take into effect that. And just like I've said this on several other ones, I think this is the time to use, depending on how quickly or slowly our industry gets back, of like using this time to like tell people, it's like, all right, think about what's been going on, like what we've been doing for all this time before we've stopped, and like think what we've actually been doing. And the optimist in me goes, well, maybe some people will. And I know the realist of me is also going, yeah, there's going to be those mixers who once it gets back, they're just going to be pushing the faders all the way to the top and I don't care. But it's trying to educate. I'll quote Neil deGrasse Tyson on this, where someone had asked him like what his thoughts about flat earthers, where he's like, yeah, I don't like them. But it's like, the point is not, he's like, I can't change that 40-year-old man who thinks the world is flat. But what I can do is make sure that their children and their children's children are educated to know that, yes, the earth is round. It's that whole idea.
You still have people who are, I mean, my good friend Wayne Pauly, he's in his late 50s. He's still carting around his gigantic analog mixer. He is not going to wake up tomorrow and go, I should transition to digital. That's just not where he's at, right? And that's fine. But I think you know, I don't think you're going to see a 19-year-old tech who just came out of school and is like, I'm analog all the way. I'm going to bring all this outboard gear on tour with me. Like, the context that that person entered into the field is just completely different than when my man Wayne came into the field, right? So I think it's going to gain its own momentum if the people who are coming into the field now are coming into an environment where we say, this needs to be done safely. We care about protecting people. Let's talk about our ethical obligation. Those discussions weren't happening 30 years ago for the reasons we've discussed, right? So I think it's a slow, gentle push. And I think I mentioned this last time, but one of the things that I advocated for, because in SMART we measure exposure, NIOSH and OSHA. So both, is this safe and is this legal, right? We're measuring both of those. Until the current version, you had to go into the settings and enable those in an advanced SPL metric. I want to measure exposure. Very tiny change, but going forward 8.5 and later, those are on by default. And that's a tiny little, from a coding standpoint, it takes them 15 seconds to just add those to the default list, right? So it's not this big thing that costs a company a bunch of money to implement, but I hope it's like a little tugboat in that we are generating this data by default. We are capturing this data by default. So I really believe that the way forward here is information. And that means education and understanding what we know to be safe and what we know to be not safe. Now, there's a lot of ongoing research about what's safe and what's not safe. Low frequency energy damaging hearing. There's a lot of questions there. There's some evidence that says, hey, it's probably not good to be at 150 dBc for 8 hours. Like, obviously, right? But there's still a lot of questions about that. But we do know that something like the NIOSH exposure calculation is very, very good at predicting noise-induced hearing loss. Very good. So one part of information is that we have, as event professionals, have a knowledge when we go about our jobs of what is safe and what is not safe for people. And also for ourselves, because we're going to have noise-induced hearing loss way before the person who goes to 4 concerts a year is going to have it. We're doing it 5 nights a week, right? The other part of the information is the data, measurement data. So, okay, I have, for every show I've mixed in the last 12 months, which we're talking about the 8 months and then 4 months of not mixing anything, right? But now every time I mix a show, I have SPL data, and we're talking about a text file that's 1 megabyte. So it's, I just keep the stuff on a folder. So I know what the exposure was. Having that data to bring to the table when you're talking about the church in Bixby who says, hey, we're following the law, and the city's saying people are complaining, we're going to sue you. Chris Leonard, my friend Chris Leonard, had a situation. He was working with a church where the city said, every time this neighbor calls and complains, we're fining you $1,000. So you're getting fined based on somebody's feelings at the moment. From a legal perspective, obviously that's not a good place to be, right?
No,
so
that's crazy.
Right. So I believe very strongly that data information is the way forward here. Let's agree on an objective metric that is acceptable to the neighbors and acceptable to the church. And then you can stick that thing up on a screen. And so everyone's on the same page, and there's no arguing, there's no bickering. And it's not he said, she said. It's, this is the number. This is what you're allowed to do. It's like the speed limit, right? No surprises about the speed limit. We all know the speed limit's on a sign. So I think those conversations have to start with, the only way you're going to get past well, I feel like it's bothering me, or we feel like it's fine, you should put up with it. The only way forward past that is to actually sit down at the table and have data, right? So to me, that's the precursor to having policies that make sense. Having policies that protect people and don't bother people and allow people to go to and have enjoyable events. All that has to come from data. A law that's passed that is not based in data, or a policy that's passed that is not based in data, is not helpful. So let's not bother with that, right? So that my as the measurement geek, right? I think that seat at the table in this discussion is very, very important, because without the data, I don't think it's a very productive conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, going back to, you mentioned this in there, it's important that people know the difference between the subjective and objective kind of measurable, the measurable safety impacts of something versus whether or not a particular audience member, for instance, just doesn't like the volume that you're mixing at. You know, the tried and tested, demonstrated sort of levels of this is going to cause hearing damage. If you're within that, then how much weight should anyone's opinion of your mixing, you know, what SPL you're mixing at, how much weight should that have? I mean, that depends on whose opinion it is, whether it's a random audience member versus the band's management or the lead singer. But for me, an audience member saying that they don't like the volume when you know fine well that it's perfectly safe and nobody else is complaining, that to me doesn't mean much more than them coming to you and telling you that they don't like that particular song. It's you wouldn't get on comms to the band and tell them to stop the song that they're playing and play something else. It's, you know, how much weight can a person's opinion have? So I think it's kind of important that people know the difference between what is subjective and what is true, measurable fact. So
I think that's a great point. I would draw an analogy like a restaurant, right? There are laws in place about you have to cook meat to this temperature, so it's not dangerous. But I mean, that doesn't mean that someone's going to like the sandwich that you make them, right? So I think the upper limit is where there's objective danger, and that line is pretty clear. We know where that is. But up until that point, yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with expectation. I mean, think about in your head being in a Metallica concert versus being in an AES panel at 9 a.m. and what you expect the SPL to be in those situations, and now switch them. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a meter on your phone or something, like go put on pink noise and turn it up. Sit in a room, turn it up till the meters, you know, in like 9 DC. That's going to feel pretty loud to you, but we go to rock concerts that are 15 dB higher than that, and we're just comfortable as a clam. And I've also had talking head events where the speech was like 78A, and people are like, "Wow, it's way too loud. You got to turn it down." So this is kind of where we started, right? Our personal expectations about context really play into that. I mean, perfect example. I love concert DVDs. I love them. I have a big collection of concert DVDs. So, I mean, you're talking about that concert, let's say it's sitting at 99A, right? 15-minute A weighted average. Let's say that's where the concert was. That's pretty representative of a typical rock concert. If you go and you put that DVD on in your living room, you turn up that loud, people are going to think you're out of your freaking mind, because that's just absurdly loud. So why? What changed? Why are we comfortable in one situation and we're not comfortable in the other situation? A lot of it's context and expectation, right? Whether or not it's objectively safe hasn't changed. So I think you're right on the money, Liam. I think my answer to that would be how good of a fit is the job the engineering is doing for the act.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's, I saw Alison Krauss on the same stage as I saw Brothers Osborne, like right after each other. And they're not at the same SPL.
Yeah.
But you sort of know where it should be for Alison Krauss, and you sort of know where it should be for Brothers Osborne, right? And so I think just like, I mean, look, I've seen some shows that have terrible mixes, right? And you're fully justified as a consumer to say, I thought the sound was terrible, I would like a refund, please. That happens, right? So yeah, I mean, if you draw the line at this is dangerous and take all those cases off the table, beyond that, what you just have is this subjectively wasn't what I wanted. And you're absolutely right. But now I think if there's 600 people at your show and 300 of them complain,
yeah,
right? So there's a bell curve aspect to this where, you know, we want to be towards the middle of that bell curve. If half the people thought it was too loud and half the people thought it wasn't loud enough, you're probably where you should be, right? But I think that's a subjective discussion, and I'm very, very reticent to get involved and try to tell someone else what their mix should be or how loud I think they should mix. I mean, you know, as a system tech, you know, is my system at risk and are the people at risk? And if those two answers are no, the mix engineer, I'm not going to say anything unless they ask, right? That's not really my job. So,
yeah. I just want to very quickly, I'm going to share an image. Scott, you may have seen this. Nathan shared this on Goes to 11 earlier. So this
Yeah, this one, I like this.
I kind of dislike this, and this kind of goes to my point of how people should be educated on what. I mean, this is obviously based on recorded music rather than live, but it still demonstrates my point. People should be educated on the facts rather than opinion and subjective matter. But also it plays to the audience expectations kind of thing. So whoever made this graph, what they've done is they've got average level and then in brackets loudness. So along the y-axis is what they're naming average level, and along the x is dynamic. So the dynamic range, so there's a dynamic range of 16 dB up to a dynamic range of 3 dB. And they've also, as I noticed, they've also put the year of release along the left-hand side to presumably to demonstrate that dynamic range has kind of got smaller as the years have gone on. As a general rule, it doesn't always follow. They're not all perfectly linear. But for instance, the dynamic range of 4 dB at a Skrillex, let's say concert rather than album, because we're just using this as a, just for demonstration purposes. But a dynamic range of 4 dB at a Skrillex concert versus a dynamic range of 16 dB at a Dire Straits concert. Now, they've coloured this in green through to red, as if a dynamic range of 3 or 4 dB is a horrible and kind of dangerous place to be, whereas a dynamic range of 16 dB is somehow objectively better. And for me, if someone went to a Skrillex concert and there was a dynamic range of 16 dB, would there be complaints that the sound was wrong? Because I think it kind of works in both directions. Each genre of music's kind of got to play the way it's supposed to be played, which obviously, if you look at the dates, it started off in 1985, and the years are going on. Apart from things like you've got Steve Wilson, Hand Cannot Erase in 2015, and then you've got a dynamic range of 1 dB less for Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon in 1973. Dynamic range has shrunk. Is that a shift in music styles as well as people just wanting louder? Is it purely people wanting louder music, or is it just that the musical styles throughout the years have had less and less dynamic range? Classical music's got a ridiculous dynamic range. I also don't, I don't know why I've got a problem with this, but I don't particularly like this up here. It says, numbers in brackets indicate worldwide sales ranking.
Yeah, what does that have to do with volume? Like, I could see what they try to do with it as a bracket, but I'm like,
there's obviously,
if they're going to do that, then why did they leave those off of the other ones then?
Presumably because they weren't high enough up to get a rating.
So putting Thriller on that chart is really interesting, because Thriller's been released at least 3 times, and every time it was released, it had a hotter master.
Right.
So there's a book by Bob Katz, who's a mastering engineer. It's called Mastering Audio: The Art and the Science, and it's a very similar presentation, but it's presented over years. And you can see, so what happens is when you're recording the tape, there's a sweet spot where you're above the noise, but you're not compressing the tape. And that's kind of where we were. And you get to digital, all of a sudden we have a meter that says, oh, you have a 1/4 dB of headroom left. You can turn it up more. So having the fact that we can meter the peaks instead of the RMS changes the game entirely. And now it becomes about this, we talked about this before, and you all know this. There's this very basic psychological principle that says louder is better, right, to humans. 1 dB louder, and we go, yeah, that one sounds better to me. So what they start doing is now they're hitting the peaks of the digital medium, and unlike tape, you're clean right up to that peak. So how do I get that RMS, which is where our loudness perception is? louder, I need to use more compression and more limiting. And so they do this thing called shred where they turn it up and clip the peaks off and then turn it back down until the highest sample is there. I mean, just really damaging stuff from an audio quality perspective until Pandora, Apple Radio, Spotify, all of a sudden it's not about peak metering. They start using loudness normalization. So now, again, that Katy Perry record that has 5 dB of dynamic range sounds 7 dB louder than the Norah Jones record. So Spotify turns it down. So all of a sudden, you as a mastering engineer, instead of being told smash it, smash it, smash it, you're now penalized for that, because when they turn your record down by 7 dB, you lost 7 dB of peaks that Norah Jones still has. So her record sounds way better than yours.
I was about to say, in a weird way, YouTube and all those other streaming services unintentionally have kind of killed off, to a degree, the loudness war because of that. There's like you said, now you're getting, to a degree, if you're doing the streaming route, you're now getting penalized for going louder. So it's kind of pushed it down, which I was kind of happy, because I'm personally, as someone, I hate that the loudness war even existed. I'm like, if you want it louder, there's a dial on your thing to just make it loud. Meaning from the consumer end.
It's still there, right? It's still there, but
oh yeah,
definitely the brakes have been put on in a big way. But I mean, here's a better and more relevant question for us in our line of work. I mean, there's a lot of information about how crest factor, which is what we're talking about here, right? How far are the peaks above the RMS? There's a lot of information on how that plays into our loudness perception. What's the dynamic? What's the crest factor of your board mix? Do you know the answer to that question? Most people have no idea, and it's such an interesting thing because it's really, really important for how we hear and how it sounds to us. I spent a whole day running my board tapes through a dynamic range meter and looking at the crest factor, and figuring out a way that I could get smart to show me the crest factor live during a show. That's important stuff, and it's also important stuff. I mean, for a system tech, we're looking at that all the time because that's how we size our amplifiers and figure out our power draw. Right, crest factor is very important. But from a mixing perspective, we pretty much don't talk about this. And I think there's a big hole there. And this is another thing that we talk about in the workshop. So anyone that's interested in come and dive into that stuff with us. But I mean, I think I'm excited to have these conversations happening because they weren't happening in the live field 10 years ago. And there's just so much stuff to dig into. So I'm really glad to hear people talking about it. You know, it's fundamentally interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's kind of why Liam and I kind of started Mixing Mondays, is just have conversations that normally on the road or whatever we just didn't have because we were too busy, doing our job. And I figure we got this time, let's have the talks, because there's this and many other topics we've mentioned in previous ones, like diversity and safety and all this. It's like no one was actively talking about it. Like it get a side comment, but it wouldn't get this deep discussion. So
I think there's a more kind of, which I'm sure Michael's workshop's almost certainly going to, is the methods of treating that gap between your RMS and your peak, that crest factor. There's quite clearly going to be a difference. If, for instance, genre was genre suitable, that you wanted to close that gap between peak and RMS. Now, there's going to be a difference in doing that in a one-step compression. If you just mixed everything and then put one very heavy-handed compressor on the master bus, that's going to sound completely different to putting a dB or two on the input on the drum bus, on the band bus, and then on the master bus, and ending up with 9 or more dB of compression in stages versus putting a clamp on things all in one go and wondering why your mix sounds like garbage.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Liam. I've been practicing doing broadcast mixes to Twitch, and I was like, oh, well, I heard in one of the interviews things like, oh, use a limiter. And I'm like, okay. And like, I wasn't even slamming limiter. I was like, just having it really push. And I was like, man, why does it sound like garbage? And I went A-B'd it. And I was just like, man, it sounds better without the limiter in some ways, or like without the like multi-band EQ. So that's already something I'm going to experiment with. It's like,
it's definitely worth trying them in stages, using a little bit more finesse with a limiter. I mean, personally, I try not to have a limiter pushing any more than 3 dB. I use the L1. Actually, I've moved over to the L3, which is a multiband limiter. And I'm trying not to have any more than 3 dB gain reduction, because beyond that you can start to hear it and it's not nice. But I layer compression throughout.
Yeah, which for me is just like, it's more been something I've been experimenting with, because most of my stuff has been just one-nighters where it's just like, all right, just make the band sound good and go. And now with this whole like COVID thing, I've had time to really go about that and like really analyze, well, how do I mix? And I think I mix pretty well, but it's just that idea of like, like, and I would always use compression just as little like limit, like, light limiting, like, 2 to 1 or a 3 to 1 ratio. But I'm like, now thinking about that as mixing of like that, and it's the same thing too of like just another thing is like, instead of just taking one big gash, do a little bit here or there, so where you still kind of save the dynamics of your mix, but also get that reduction in volume is something I'm definitely going to try. And just also just on a volume thing with broadcast, it's been fascinating, doing it. Like I would mix on what you see here, and then I would mute my headphones and then listen to the broadcast here. And I was like, I don't need to make it as loud as I actually think I do, because certain frequencies aren't getting covered, but then other things are getting excited. So that's just another thing in broadcasts too. That's another deep hole to dig.
Yeah, and there's things like not only a number value in terms of dB on how much compression you're applying, but also things like attack and release times. If you've got a band bus with compression on that's permanently -3 or -6 or however far you want to push into it, that's going to have a different feel to something that's got a release time dialed in, so that the gain reduction is kind of pumping with the track. Having it living in compression is something that you could choose to do, but if I was going to have something living permanently in compression, I'd probably have it living in less compression. I'm not going to be as heavy-handed, not as brute force with the compression if it's going to be more constant. If it's going to be less constant, I might, depending on the music, of that dial moving a little bit more. But the attack and release times is something that I think gets overlooked by a lot of people. I think it's quite confusing for a lot of people as well, and especially people like yourself and like myself when I was working in a venue where you maybe don't have like that much time to experiment with things like attack and release time or threshold settings. You're kind of just throwing it in there and trying to catch some stray transients maybe, and you're not really expecting much more than that. You're not wanting any more of an artistic result than that. It's kind of a safety measure more than anything, like a bumper.
Yeah, pretty much is what I use them for.
Yeah.
But it's also just the kind of, I hate to always quote them, but when Chris and Pooch were talking about doing either 1176 or something that's emulating it, just put one on your drum bus, put one on your bass bus, and then adjust, I think it was the release, and saying how that actually will mess with time a little bit, which then that also too, time arrival can also affect like how much power and punch something is. Like take away like the, line up everything on the grid, but like when sound arrives at slightly different times, that's why like, there's a whole argument about front fills. It's like if you time align front fills, like the theory is a time-aligned front fill will have more power than an untime-aligned front fill at the same exact volume, because you're getting the sound at the same exact moment. I remember.
Yeah, but then people will often slightly mistime them so that you're getting that Haas effect. So you're kind of getting Now, normally you would do it so that it sounds like everything's coming from the main PA. So for things like delay hangs, you would maybe have the main PA reach you fractionally before the delay hang reaches you. So the actual level that you're getting is from the delay hang, but it appears to be coming from the stage. Whereas you would do it the other way around for front fills, so as to not have the audience spending 90 minutes feeling like the whole concert's above them. You kind of need to look at timing from that point of view, which I'm sure Michael's dealt with a lot more than any of us.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing, as I think Michael, I mentioned this like probably right before you came back too, is I think Stephen mentioned it. I've been up since 5. My brain's been a little. Is that idea of just designing the system well too, and just like that can also be a good factor. Like obviously there's, as you mentioned, several other things, which is interesting. It's like if you've already had a system that has a really good sound, system tech or sound designer, like that can also help you in the way of reducing your volume in the right ways. It's just a well aimed and designed system can make a world of difference.
I mean, we're talking about design goals, right? I mean, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the show, and it's also what it was pretty much the core of my summit presentation this year was about that. Like if you're not thinking about SPL coverage over the space until you open up your computer and launch Smart on the day when you're ready to tune it, you way missed the boat. There are certain systems that are not really optimizable in a way that we would like because they weren't designed in a way that lends themselves to that. There are also systems that the design is so good that when you hang them up in the space and turn them on, you're like, that's fine, I'm not going to do anything to it. So I think the earlier you start thinking about these things, the better. And so to me, that's all about a design goal. If not bothering the neighbors is the goal, telling the front of house engineer to turn it down, that's the last thing that you have at your disposal, really. I mean, that stuff starts we did a lot of work with the Outside Lands Festival out in San Francisco, and looking at the city's restrictions on what the noises was, and like, okay, don't point the stage toward the city, point it out towards the ocean. They're like, well, we can't really turn it around. Like, start at the very basic things, like which way the show points and how you're deploying your subs, you know what I mean, and a little bit of progress at each one of those decisions means you can end up with a situation you don't have to worry about this thing, versus I'm not going to think about it till show day. I'm just going to surprise the front of house engineer with it and tell them to turn down. It's a design goal. So, I mean, when I started a system design, I want to know what are the limitations of the space, what do I have at my disposal, and what do we want this thing to do? And not bother the neighbors. If that's the concern, that should be on the list at that point, and then we'll proceed with that in mind, right? So, and Liam, time alignment's the same thing, right? Like how you design a theater system for a Broadway theater is way different than how we design the delays for a rock show. Way different. And it's not just about tuning. It's not just about what setting I put in the DSP. It's literally, it comes down to, I mean, what speakers do we choose, and where do we choose to hang them, and what angles do we point them at? Like, all of the decisions we make it's kind of like buying a car, right? So you can't just go like, I'm going to buy a car. What car should I buy? You got to give us a little more information than that. Do you need to carry things? Do you need to go fast? Do you care how it looks? Do you have children you need to bring to soccer practice, right? Do you care about the gas mileage? Do you need to tow something? Like, if you buy a car and then you don't start thinking about that stuff till afterwards, you're going to be in a rough situation. So it's really no different, I would say, than something like that, where let's figure out what we need this thing to do from square one, and then let's build a system that does that, right?
Yeah, which is another thing I forget, again, that tiredness is, I think I'd mentioned too with OSHA, is like they were talking about how there's like, personal safety devices are actually the last line of defense. As properly engineered, space is actually the better idea. So what again you're talking about is within line of safety. It's like, think about it way before a person even steps in the room.
Yeah.
And I feel like at this point, I think unless someone else wants to continue, I think we've covered this topic really well. It's like, Liam or Michael or Gregory, if there's anything else you kind of want to put on this, I think this is probably a good point to end this.
I was just about to excuse myself anyway, because I'm supposed to be doing things, but
well,
It was
Thanks for coming.
it's always a pleasure to chat with you, gentlemen. So I
Yes,
appreciate
thank you. So we'll end.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you all for who are watching this on YouTube. Press that like button. You know what to do with the bell. Share it with your friends. And signing off.